Well, we have a very special lockdown podcast today because we have two very special guests, or three actually, not that he's a guest. One, former England captain, Michael Atherton.
Morning, Rob. How are you?
I'm very well. And then we have the person who I think is the best captain in the world at the moment, Eoin Morgan. You can have your Coleys and people like that. This bloke's by far and away the best. How are you, Morgs?
Yeah, good, thanks, Rob. Morning, Ath.
And then one very, very special guest. We have Sam Mendes. Not only has he won a Best Director Oscar, Best Picture Oscar, he is one of the best directors in the world of stage and screen. Films like American Beauty, 1917, Revolutionary Road, wrote a Petition, the Bond franchise of late. We have Sam Mendes.
Hi, Rob. How are you? Hi, guys.
How is lockdown treating you, Sam?
Well, you know, we're one of the lucky ones with a garden and the kids can run around in space. You know, I feel for all the people who are stuck in flats and what have you. But yeah, I've done more gardening in the last 2 weeks than I ever have in my entire life.
Owen, you're a new father. Congratulations. Fantastic news.
Thanks, Ath. Yeah, very exciting. I think we've sort of had the best of a really bad situation over the last few weeks. We've been in lockdown since little baby Leo was born 3 weeks ago. So very lucky and excited. Long nights, a lot of changing nappies and burping from my point of view, which is, it's great. It's a new experience. So yeah, I'm loving it.
Why Leo? I'm trying to think of a film analogy here. It's not after Albert Finney in Miller's Crossing, is it? The great gangster boss.
I wish it was as deep and as thoughtful as that, but it actually wasn't.
That was just showing off, Athers, I'm afraid. You could have said Leonardo DiCaprio, or but no, it had to be some obscure movie that
What is the connection then, Ath and Sam? How did you get to meet?
We crossed over very briefly at university, although I didn't know Sam then. But I will tell a reasonably funny story. It sounds like I'm name dropping, but I don't mean to. When Sam was married to Kate Winslet, they invited me up for lunch up in Oxfordshire. So I was kind of driving out of London up on the M40 and kind of looked to the left on the hard shoulder. And I said to my wife, that's Kate Winslet stood on the hard shoulder. Bizarre. And there she was. They were in a green Mini and they'd run out of petrol. So we kind of got to the house long before them, and then lunch was a perfunctory sandwich, and I spent 3 hours holding out in the back garden. 1917, most people might not know that a few of the minor cast or minor characters in the cast are named after England cricketers. I didn't see a Private Morgan or a Captain Morgan.
Athers, if he'd warned me I would be having to chat to Eoin Morgan, I would have named a character after him.
It's quite a touching thing as to why you were thinking about the England players whilst you were making that movie about male friendships and the bonds that connect people.
I was very struck reading reports of the First World War about the friendships that developed between people who in civilian life would not necessarily even meet, let alone become friends. And I was trying to create in the center of the movie an unlikely friendship between, you know, a middle-class boy and a working-class boy, really. And so when I was thinking about the dynamics between men when left alone or in a very male atmosphere from different backgrounds, it was very inevitable that I would refer in my own mind to cricket teams that I played with. And there's a scene in a truck, you know, where I was trying to get that feeling of people from different backgrounds, different parts of, you know, the British Isles, all mucking in together in an unexpected way and making friendships. And so one of them is called, you know, Private Stokes, and another is called Private Cook, and another is called Private Butler. You know, it has nothing to do with their appearance. I hasten.
Are you suggesting that they're different characters?
Private Butler in the film has terrible teeth, and I don't want Joss.
Very accurate. How did you manage to find somebody like that? Bad breath as well.
Yeah.
But Owen, you spoke after that World Cup final victory. You spoke about exactly that thing at length, actually, in one press conference that I remember, about the diversity within your team. You know, the fact that you've just taken on Archer from the Caribbean, you had Moeen Ali and Adil Rashid in there, you had Stokes, you know, working class lad from Wokington. I mean, that seemed to be absolutely what Sam is talking about there in his, you know, experience of amateur sport. No different in your team, and the value and advantages that diversity of thought and experience and background brought.
Oh, we've always certainly seen it as a huge advantage, and probably the things that have become, or we've seen sort of traveling up and down the country the last 2 or 3 years, is actually that it surmises really well our society. Now it's not anything different that's going on outside of the realms of the cricket bubble, but we see ourselves as representing exactly what's happening in England and Wales at the moment. There's such a diverse culture of people of different races, religions and backgrounds that probably haven't been comfortable enough talking about it in the past. Certainly when I've grown up, and the first few years that I came to England, I suppose in, I can't remember, 2003, being comfortable enough to talk about my ambition to play with England, and it being my dream, even though that I was born and raised in Ireland, I didn't necessarily feel that comfortable talking about it. I enjoyed living it and breathing it and embodying it, but when it came to actually addressing it and being outspoken about it, it took me a lot of time. And when you look at our team, probably particularly race and faith are two, you know, topics that guys are comfortable talking about, because the journeys that have led people to playing cricket for England, and inevitably eventually us winning the World Cup, has been truly extraordinary. And I believe that, you know, in fantastic sports teams that always deal with high levels of performance, they deal with intangible things that make them feel as opposed to do, and that really does make a difference. The All Blacks talk about it a huge amount. When you go into their changing room on a game day, they will always have little treats that at school growing up in New Zealand, up and down the country, they will have different, you know, it might be Jolly Rogers or fizzy colas or something. They stick one in their mouth, and it reminds them of the journey that they've been on, you know, a school treat or something like that. So certainly the diverse nature in which our team and squad is built, we've totally embraced and are extremely comfortable talking about it.
And Morgs, you as a leader, I mean, both of you will have to deal with lots of different people. How do you get the best out of these? How do you get people to let go and just throw caution to the wind in cricket terms, the same in acting?
I think in cricket terms, certainly the journey that we've been on, the first level that sort of I certainly tried to build was that constant level of trust that probably wasn't there in the past, simply because I suppose the level of risk that you're asking to take guys, particularly batsmen, you're asking them to be vulnerable on a regular basis, probably fail more often than not, but continue to buy into the way that we think is the best way to win a World Cup. And to do that, I mean, you do very humane things you that you would do in any good relationship. You tell people where you're going, what you're doing. You do exactly what you say, so you're honest with what you're doing, and that's where the trust starts from. It completely breaks down if you want somebody to be vulnerable and bowl at the end when you've told them he's only going to bowl with the new ball and then in the middle, and you drop a bombshell on him. That sort of breaks down. Or if you drop a player within three games of doing exactly what you've asked them to do, but the performance and result wasn't there. So building that trust over a long period of time has proved extremely beneficial, certainly for us. But part of that is being comfortable in your own skin and creating an environment where people are comfortable enough to talk about friends, family, their journey from Barbados to Sussex, from Dublin to London, from, you know, the council estate in Birmingham or Bradford, all the way through to England coloured shirts. So I think that plays a huge part in actually performing at the highest level on a field.
What about you? Can you relate to that, Sam?
It's very moving hearing what Eoin says about this is the big difference between sport, I think, and film or theatre or anything I do. That pre-match talk before the World Cup final, for most people probably would have been, the biggest day of their life, and they know that going in, and they certainly know it after the event, and that's something that's a different kind of psychology of sporting people on the edge, right on the edge. We get a second chance, and I think that's a big difference between what you do and what we do. We get to do it again if we mess up. The collaboration is all about making everybody feel, particularly the actors, that they own it. That they're not fulfilling some figment of my imagination. That their character is theirs is very important, and that there are no. I mean, I don't have many sort of aphorisms or things that I say to actors, but one of the few things I do say is there is no right and wrong. There is only interesting and less interesting. You can't make a mistake. You can only do something that I think could be better, and that's so that you're trying to take out the negatives, and I think that allows people to take risks. Think, well, what the hell? I'm going to try it this way. I'm going to do something crazy. I'm going to do something instinctive. You're trying to encourage people to be their own authors in a way as actors, and to own the role, so that they feel they begin to have an instinctive understanding that's greater than yours or the person who's written it or anybody else's. It's theirs. I feel like, what has happened with Owen's team, I just have to say this out loud, right? You scored 490 against the Australians in a 50-over game, 490. I mean, when I was growing up, people, they gave this West Indies a standing ovation, on the 79 World Cup. What do they make? 289 off 60 overs, 400 in a 10 and over in a 50. It's gone so far, so fast that, and there was a sense that there was, you watch ways in which one team can inspire another. You talk about the All Blacks, but there was also a sense in which the New Zealanders under Brendan McCallum, had a little bit of that. You got the feeling that, okay, well, we're going to punch above our weight. We're going to try and come out, and we're going to take the attack to the, obviously in a way you could argue it started with the Sri Lankans, with the Jayasuriya era Sri Lankans who just came out and just, went for it and suddenly changed the nature of the one-day game.
Eoin and Brendan are very tight. They're like that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And Eoin, I guess, you would have learned from Brendan McCullum and kind of leaned on what they did, but there's a point at which you have to be your own person as well. You can't just be a copycat captain or a copycat director. No doubt you're looking at what everybody else is doing, but then you've got to take ownership of it as well yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the challenges, I suppose, as a leader to begin with. You have these ideas, I suppose, if you're already in a leadership role within a team, potentially a senior player, about what decisions you might make, but actually until you're landed in the role and you have to implement and be wholly responsible for every decision that you make, it needs to be your own. It needs to sit well with you. And certainly Baz is somebody that, yes, I'm very tight with him, but have learned a huge amount from. He inspired me quite a lot, particularly during that 2015. Like Sam mentioned, New Zealand always managed to punch above their weight, but actually in cricket, particularly in the white ball game, probably since 2007, they've reached every ladder stage, every semi-final of a World Cup since then, which is a huge feat. So that they're actually not punching above their weight. They're getting the most out of what they have. A population of 4.5 million. Cricket is not necessarily popular. New Zealand is dominated by rugby, and there's huge challenges that comes with that. But having played under Straussy as well for quite some time, there are attributes that I try and take from Straussy. There's one in particular that I found. So I made my debut in 2009. He was captain of the 50 over and the test team at the time, and played for a couple of years, and sort of found myself thinking, how does he manage to surmise and land his message every time he speaks? And nobody ever talks about, they always talk about being yourself and having great direction and then embodying that and taking everybody with you. But the skill within that and being able to articulate and make it land actually is in the listening. So not a lot of leaders do it. A lot of leaders just go out, be themselves, talk about various different things, where we're going, but don't actually listen to a lot of feedback, can't figure out what direction guys are going in. Straussy was absolutely brilliant in it. And that's something I've learned, because you don't always have to talk because it's the morning of a game or you're in a meeting. Actually being vulnerable as a leader and bringing people up around you and being vulnerable enough to say, right, I want you to be better than me at leading this team. And certainly I think we've done that within the 50 over game and T20 with leaders like Joe, Joss, Ben, Chris, Johnny, Jason. We've a number of guys that I would feel really comfortable with handing over the reins at different stages and just sitting back in order for the team to learn more and also to test myself as a captain.
And Sam, Eoin talks there about cherry picking bits from other captains he's learnt from, Strauss or McCullum. Were you the same growing up and a love of film? As you became a director, were there directors that you'd kind of learnt from and cherry picked from before you put your own kind of finishing touches to it, as it were?
Well, it's a funny thing, really, because, you know, as a player, Eoin would have played under a number of captains before he himself became a captain. And of course, you know, you get to see all sorts of different ways in which teams can be run and governed, the mistakes people make and the things that they do well. As a director, one of the strange things about being a director, and one of the difficult things, is that you don't get to see other directors work, because, you know, as the theatre director Peter Brook says, the only way you can become a director is to call yourself a director and then persuade everybody else that is in fact the case. Because I don't have a diploma that says, you know, I'm a professional director or anything. It's just a sort of act of will, in a way. You just say, right, I'm the director. So in the immortal words of George Bush when discussing the Iraq War, you know, when he said, I'm the decider, he said, you know, and that is basically what you are. And you just, you know, you make the decisions. So you have to intuit the way other people direct, and you have to learn from other walks of life, and you have to learn something that Eoin just said, which I think is absolutely on the money, that so much of it is about listening to other people, and looking at what's in front of you. And it took me a long time as a young director to learn when to shut up, you know, to stop talking. And I think it's nerves, apart from anything else. When you're young and you're directing actors who in many cases are much more experienced than you, have seen many more rehearsal processes, have watched more directors than you, you know, you're so eager to impress them and to give them a sense that you know what you're doing, that sometimes you just talk too much. And it took a long time to realize, even in film, a classic case would be, you know, don't tell the actor what you want them to do before the first take. You know, let them, they know what is expected. They've read the script, you know, you probably rehearsed a bit, you know, you talked about the makeup of the scene, you've worked out how to shoot it. Let them have a couple of goes, you know, let them do 2 or 3 takes without talking to them. And you'd be surprised often that they're absolutely not only doing exactly what you want, but better often. If they're not, then you step in and you start to steer them in one direction or another. And oftentimes it's not, you know, anyone can talk about the effect of something, you know. Any captain could go say to a batsman, I want you to go out there and get a century, you know. That's not captaincy, it's not leadership, you know. So that would be the equivalent of saying to an actor, I want you to be frightening, you know, or I want you to move me, you know, or I want you to be really funny. Just do this scene as funny as you can. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to hear the effect. That's not directing, you know. You begin to work out how to indirectly steer people. An example would be, for example, let's say you're having two actors having dinner and one of them's waving their hands around and their focus is all off and the energy is not coming from where you want it to, which is from their face. So let's just do a take where you don't put down your knife and fork and suddenly they're not moving their hands and all the energy comes out of their face. Now, I've not said to them, stop waving your arms about, or your energy's in the wrong place, or I want you to be more intense, or some generalization. You give them a very specific, practical direction. Just don't put down your knife and fork. And in microcosm, that is directing. You're often steering people towards something that they're not consciously aware of by the use of something very practical, you know. And there is a crossover there with leadership, with sports leadership, you know. Think about the small things. Think about the next ball. Just concentrate on the next ball. Don't think about the result. Don't think about the run rate yet. Give it 4 overs. Play yourself in. Whatever it is, you know. Those would be my pretty banal amateur, you know, directions to my batting partner if we were up against it or whatever. You know, those things. And I remember talked a little bit about mystery. And of course, one of my great heroes, as Athers knows, is Mike Rayleigh. Who's become a friend and who I wrote the foreword for one of his editions for the Art of Captaincy many years ago, because it struck me in that book that was very like, he described and talked about leadership as very much as I would, you know, from a completely different walk of life, and that I thought was fascinating. But there was always a mystique about Brez. You know, there was always a sense that, you know, he would trot up to Bob Willis, you know, and he would say something in his ear, you know, and trot all the way back with his slightly mincing steps back to first clip. And you think, what's he said? What's he said to him? You know, has he given him some, look to make him drive or you know, keep him tucked up or whatever it is that he would be saying to his bowlers. You know, but that the one all you want is one specific. And I was very struck actually in South Africa recently watching you skipper actually, Eoin, because I felt that there was in the T20s, there was an even greater authority that you had a greater authority even than you had in the World Cup. And I wondered for you, if you felt that winning the World Cup has given you just that feeling of having a little bit more muscle, you know, and why you made the decision. Because obviously there was, you know, is that it? Are you going to retire? All that sort of nonsense, which I didn't understand why they're suddenly putting pressure on you to retire. You won the World Cup. Anyway, the sports press are a funny bunch. But we're like, what? You're asking me you want to retire? You should be begging him to stay, you numpties. Anyway, but I did think there must have been a little bit of you that thought, yeah, maybe quit while I'm ahead, maybe. But on the other hand, you're in the prime of sporting life. You're batting better than you have ever. You know all of those things. So how did you feel, and what made you make that choice to stay? And what's your next goal?
Yeah, good question. I suppose the thing I was really after the World Cup, like any, I suppose, goal that you set, and whether you achieve it or fall short, you like to take time, reassess, and try and see the next period of time as clearly as possible. Because I sort of strive off having that direction and then going and moving towards it. So there was a bit of a question over my fitness. My back had been struggling throughout the World Cup. So I needed time in order to prove to myself, which was about 3 weeks. I also needed time away from the game, which I didn't necessarily have. About 10 days after the World Cup final, I was back at Lords playing in the T20 Blast for Middlesex and continued to play for another 3.5 weeks. So it sort of prolonged any bit of headspace that I might have had or clarity in what my future looked like. But certainly performing and scoring runs haven't been a huge worry for the last 2 or so years. I've been lucky enough to be in the form of my life. I'm coming into my prime years and most experienced. But like you mentioned, there's always that tendency, and you see it in all sports, that people achieve something on the top of their mountain in their own fields. The people want to push you off.
Yeah. I remember I had an equivalent moment when I came back after America, because I was both fortunate, 80% fortunate, 20% unfortunate, in that my first movie, I won an Oscar for my first ever film, and it won Best Picture. And then I went back to England, and I remember a journalist who shall go unnamed. That's probably because I can't remember his name anymore. But and he said to me, "So I suppose you'll be buggering off to Hollywood now? Will you be going to Hollywood now? You won the Oscar." And I said, "Actually, no. I'm going to stay here and run my theatre." Where I was running the Donmar at the time. And he went, "Why?" Like that. And there you have the English attitudes. Like, okay, if it were me, I would go. But I'm going to hate you if you go, and I'm going to hate you if you stay. So it's up to you. You know what I mean? Which version of my hate are you going to have? Are you going to have the hate that you're going to get if you don't win the next World Cup, or are you going to have the hate you're going to get if you're retired?
I think we were a victim when it came to selecting guys. I mean, certainly early on in my career, we've sat in meetings where we've played against teams that have the most experienced guys. They've played hundreds of games, and you look at their statistics and you sit in the meeting trying to figure a way to get them out, and you're sort of in awe by the amount of games that they've played. You look around the room and you think, Jesus, why don't we have that? And then you fail a couple of times and you go through a couple of series, and then there's a fresh face in, and you're thinking, well, hold on. Surely the opposition team have held faith for an extremely long time and believed their first decision was the right one long enough to keep the guy on. So I totally agree with you. Things change pretty quickly, and probably not for the right a lot of the time.
Mark, Sam's talking about process as well, over like the outcome. When you like that, with that super over, that's exactly what you did. That's how you spoke to the players, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I think when you get into the most ridiculous situation like we found ourselves in, we sort of got in a bit of a huddle, and I'm not one for big Churchillian speeches, but I think recognizing the moment that you're in and accepting it for what it is quite a big thing. People come, I suppose, from any distraction and recognize the feet on the ground, what the objective is for those particular 6 balls. So to start with, it was recognizing that, and then for me, it was a matter of putting smiles on people's faces. So making sure you looked at somebody, you wanted to say something that made sure that when people walked away, they actually had a smile on their face. It wasn't, oh crap, what are we going to do? Actually, everything that had happened in the day, you did not want to land. You wanted it to be a fun, uplifting thing. So I surmised what I thought it was. It's a ridiculous situation that we find ourselves in. It is a World Cup final. This is where we want to be, and we want to play it with a smile on our face. This is awesome. And we sort of walked away and laughed and joked about it, and then went and spoke to Joffre.
What did you say to Joe?
So again, I try and be clear with sort of helping the process the bowler is trying to go through. So I find a little bit to the way like TB operates. You ask good questions, and you ask a question predominantly you know the answer to, and the bowler does straight away. So what I continually ask them, what's your best ball for this situation? And his answer repeatedly was his Yorker. So reinforcing that before we started the over and throughout the over, unless something drastically changed, was very, very important, because particularly the first ball, given that it was a wide and Joffre blew up a little bit, taking him back.
He wanted to review it, didn't he?
Yeah, he wanted to review it. That was, I forgot about that. Yeah. He said, man, review the ball, review it. And I sort of said, no, you can't do that. And I had the ball in my hand, and I consciously held onto the ball for as long as I could, because I know, having been in pressure situations, standing beside bowlers, if the ball is in their hand, they get to the end of their mark, don't really listen or forget what's being said, turn around and run in and bowl. So it's taking them off that routine of I suppose, what they'd normally do. So there's a bit of thought, there's direction, and then there's hopefully a bit more of a precise result behind it. Joffre is an unbelievable athlete, cricketer, talent. The stuff that he did throughout that World Cup was absolutely remarkable. And to take it all on board in the stride that he did was exceptional. And it's a little bit scary to think that his first year of international cricket has been so successful and exciting. What is yet to come? Because he still has more to give.
I wondered whether you were talking there about the experience of that particular over, how much the World T20 experience impacted upon that when Stokes went for his 4 sixes from Carl off Brathwaite, how much you had learned from that particular situation, because it struck me as a little odd at the time that there wasn't more interaction between you and Ben during that particular over. You know, whether it was a simple thing of why don't you just bowl wide of off stump because it'd be hard as hit for 6 or whatever. I just wondered how much you'd learned from that particular episode yourself.
Yeah, I think we learned a lot. I think probably primarily we learned that you're never out of a game. You can always lose a game of cricket regardless of the situation. So you need to take everything deep and not take things for granted. That particular over with Ben, I totally agree with you. I do look back on it and wish that I'd taken more time at the end of Ben's mark. But at the time, I actually felt as if I was taking time, but wasn't. And I think if you look at me as a captain now, as opposed to in 2016 World Cup final, you'd say that I would walk majority of the way as opposed to jog or run. And I would process everything. Even if you go and stand beside the bowler for a period of time without saying anything, actually your presence can mean as much as what you're saying. So I think I have learned a little bit. And it's important for me to do that because I need to continue to learn to try and impart that on the team. And if I'm not learning, you can't expect other guys to learn and grow. And ultimately, learning and growing in high performance environments is the most important thing, because anybody can come in and perform on a one-off basis, but you need guys taking everything in, recognizing what's needed in the situation, engaging with that, and then adapting. So yeah. Thanks for bringing up that nightmare.
It's typical of Atherton to go right for the jugular there. You see, if it'd been him and been asked that question by the press, he'd have got all sulky and monosyllabic.
When are we getting on to Atherton?
He expects you to give a nice, eloquent, answer about, the worst moment of your professional cricketing career, right? It's like, but what I was trying to say earlier when I was saying about the way in which you dealt with the T20 in South Africa, I was really struck by the authority that you have compared to the end of that, because I think that those T20s in South Africa recently they were all tight. They were really tight games.
Yeah, good games.
And the last over of each one, you absolutely, when you were bowling second, you had complete control over it, and you pulled the game back. You were pulling on the reins, slowing it down, and I think it was Chris Jordan doing the last over or whoever. But I was really struck by the control you had there. And in comparison with you have a lack of control in that Stokes over, but you would have behaved differently. And I think that it's visible the way in which not only you developed as a skipper, but also the fact that you've won the World Cup, and it makes a big difference. Those things make a big difference. I think that the feeling of that you're empowered now in a different way, and it's interesting, isn't it, when you consider what a knife edge the World Cup final was, how different one little thing like that that last ball of that World Cup can make everything. It's just, it gives you a confidence that perhaps you might not have even had. This is the way it goes, I suppose.
In any walk of life, we'd all love to go back to the beginning with what at the end.
Yeah.
And the tragedy of sport is that we can't do that. You're in a different field, and you can go on and on, which is a fortunate thing, as you say.
But you also, I mean, one of the nice things about the media, without wanting to blow smoke, is that you do get the feeling that, I mean, I feel this about, don't tell him, but I feel this about Nasser, right? There's a Nasser Hussain as captain. You know, I remember meeting him, having dinner with him, with some friends, on the night after, or 2 days after he had resigned as England captain. And he was completely locked down. He was in a kind of bubble of silence and tension and fury, and
that doesn't sound like Nas.
Yeah,
The person that is now there, the person that has developed on the media that you see become the person that goes and chats with, does his little tour around India and does his, meets Kohli and does all this. That's a person who's grown in the media and understands the game from a different perspective, has played it to a high standard, but also understands and believes in it, in the social power of the game and the way the power of communication that professional sport has, and so it is a lifetime's work. You have to view it as a lifetime's work. You just can't play for a lifetime, but there's lots more to learn about it and to see from different perspectives how the world treats it and what the purpose of it is in society. And I think that certainly in India, that's that is a lifetime's work. But one of the nicest, I mean, if I started directing movies at the same age you, Atherton, retired, and that's, so my entire movie career has been since I was 34.
Yeah.
And that's sobering. Professional sport is to state the absolute obvious, is a young man's game. But to watch someone learn and develop in the way that they did. And one of the things I was always interested about with Braley was that he's one of the very unusual cases of someone who stopped playing the sport when he was playing at quite a high level, went off and did something else, trained as a therapist, then went back and started playing the sport again, and had a perspective, an inside-outside perspective. It's very difficult for professional sportsmen to achieve, that you have a sort of sense of, an interest in other parts of the world and other ways of viewing human beings, and then you come and bring some of that knowledge back into professional sport. And it was one of the reasons why I think he was such a good captain. He had some perspective.
And he captained Middlesex effectively for a decade before he captained England, which of course is now not an avenue open to any England captain. Joe Root, I think, captained 4 games for Yorkshire before he became England captain. Owen would have done a little bit here and there, but Braley had that almost decades worth of experience where he's not just captaining the team, he's basically running a county club. And that is a huge advantage, I think, to bring to the point at which he took over as England captain.
Yeah, and I think also what's interesting is that, you've got, in the same way that I'd say, you become a director by calling yourself a director and then just doing it, and the proof of the pudding, etc. You're either going to, succeed, or you're never going to be given the money to make another film. In the same way, somebody like Owen and somebody like Joe Root, you're learning on the job, and you don't know how much you're going to learn or how good you're going to be until you're right in the middle of it. I mean, you're in the thick of it, and that's when you find out who you actually are as a captain. I mean, what you say, talking about what you were saying to Jofra and the England team during the Super Over, or before the Super Over, actually made me have slight palpitations. How you could possibly have the sang-froid in the situation that you were in, to consciously think, I need to make this also make it okay if we lose. To put a smile on people's faces and say, look, this is ridiculous. It is what it is. It's a World Cup final, but you still got to go over the smile. That's a very, very hard thing to do. And until you're in that situation, you don't know that you have the mettle to do that. There's no way of training for that. You either have it when you're, in the moment, or you don't. And that's what makes a natural leader, I think. Sometimes one looks back at the big moments and one is disappointed in oneself for not being able to say the right thing at the right time and what have you. And it's a wonderful thing for you that you don't have that you can look back and think, well, that was a great moment, and in the moment when I needed to turn up, I did.
How do you boys hide that though? You're in chaos. You're under so much pressure. How do you hide that from your body language and everything more? I mean, I've seen you since for years. You're the master, and I'm sure you are, Sam, as well, of just going, no, I'm not going to show this. I'm not going to show the panic. How do you do that?
Yeah, I think for me to start with, even before I became captain, it's not something that's ever worked for me. I don't know if Sam's seen Virat Kohli in the field when he's captaining. He's up and down like a yo-yo. It's absolute emotional roller coaster. I don't know how he doesn't cry halfway through. It's crazy. But I can't operate like that. I can't make decisions if I'm screaming and shouting and living every ball on the edge. And I actually found that out as a player when I was at Middlesex, a very young player. We were playing against Essex at Lords in a championship game, and I was 96 not out. I think it was before lunch or tea, and Danish Canary was bowling, and I'd never scored a 100 for Middlesex. And I thought it was a great idea to run down the wicket and try and hit him over the pavilion, the ball before the break. And I missed the ball by about a foot. And was stumped and walked off the field and was ushered off by all the Essex fielders. So on the way off, I lost my rag. I was screaming and shouting, walking through the long room, all the way up the stairs, effing and blind, and all the way into the changing room. And I reckon there was about a 30-second silence before the coach, John Embry, came up, who had been in the committee room and had heard everything because the doors were open and there was nobody there. It was a championship game, and said, "Right, I need to speak to you out the back now." And now I'm sweating, I'm half spewing, I'm like nervous. What's he going to do? What's he going to say? And he gave me the all-time spray of my life. So from then on, I thought I was going to get sacked. He talked about the higher purpose of playing for Middlesex and being a cricketer, the role that you play. And I suppose, evidently, it doesn't work for me. Being emotional about making decisions makes me make erratic calls on captaining or shots I might want to play or situations. And actually a tool that I've used over the years, particularly in international cricket or T20 games where there's a lot of people there, is the scoreboard. And Sam, you don't necessarily have a scoreboard while you're directing, which must be incredibly difficult, because to calm yourself down or actually not get too carried away with the situation, the scoreboard is the absolute truth of what is going on in the game. Makes you realize what decision you need to make, when and where, what situations you're in. And I find particularly in the subcontinent when, crowds, noise can be dictated by Sachin taking his hand out of his pocket and waving to the crowd, 40,000 people off their seat as if they've won the game. You actually need that checkpoint at different stages. And I suppose a challenge for you then, you never, when you finish probably making a movie and the final cuts and then you've given it the absolute seal of approval, the actual unknown space you're in before people actually watch it must be quite unnerving and I suppose disturbing. But how do you deal with that and find a way of dealing with it as you get older? Because
you talk about Kohli, and Kohli's really, I think, an unusual guy, because Kohli is one of the few captains I've seen who is that expressive. And I don't know. I also, as a layman viewer, don't know how he does it. I remember saying to some friends when I first started making movies, when you make a movie, you've got to be bloody sure you're channeling Bjorn Borg and not John McEnroe, because you've got to, if you're channeling McEnroe, you'd be exhausted after 2 days. I'm very much in the Eoin Morgan camp of not showing what's really going on in your head, and having touchstones that calm you when you're doing it, that remind you of your immediate goal. If what I was thinking about a performer was coming out of my mouth as they were doing it, I probably wouldn't have got very far. You know what I mean? Because you can't, you have to edit yourself, and also people have to have my critical brain is hidden almost all the time, and directing is the formulation of how to translate the critical brain into palatable behavioral suggestions. Directing is the art of turning psychology into behavior, you could say. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to direct behavior the whole time. And so you don't want people working in states of tension. You can't shout at them. They'll start thinking about what they'll lose their own instincts, and they'll freeze, they'll get tense, all of those things that go on when people are made self-conscious, But what you're talking about when releasing a film, that's a whole other thing. I mean, that's when you are the thing that you're in the spotlight. Most of the time when you're making a film, everyone else, you're trying to, you're shifting the spotlight from actor to actor, department to department, whether it be cinematography and design when you're shooting, or editing or music when you're in post, or sound, which is the misunderstood art, really. But then when you finished it, it's you. And I remember I'd had a very good experience making Skyfall. Skyfall was a very, it was hard, but I really enjoyed it. But I'd been, because of the way that Bond, most movies you preview them in a quite a planned and a pre-organized way. So a preview, you generally go to the States if you're not already there, preview it in a smallish suburban community where a multiplex, you shut down one of the screens. The National Research Group invites an audience of 300 random, but a selection, old, young, different races, different ages, different, a good mix, basically. And then they give them a form to fill out at the end, which bits they'd enjoyed and which bits they hadn't, and ask them to do a bunch of box ticking. And then there's a little focus group of 25 people at the end where you go into a little bit more detail. Did you understand this? Were there any particular bits that bored you? All of that stuff. But with Bond, you don't do that because it's so such a lockdown. You can't show it to anyone. They go on the internet these days. They put it on Twitter, and you're done. All the story, people put the plot out and all that sort of stuff. So we didn't really even do a preview. So I'd finished this giant movie almost in total solitude. That was the weird thing. It was just like this film that everyone in the world, who's interested in those sorts of movies is going to go and see, but no one had seen it. And I turned up to the Royal Albert Hall for the premiere, feeling pretty good. I was excited, obviously the producers had seen it, but not many other people. And I turned the corner, and there was about 20,000 people lining the road. I mean, it was just, there were crash barriers all the way down to the Royal Albert Hall, massive red car. I mean, and I suddenly was nervous for the first time in the whole. I suddenly thought, oh my God, the expectation, this belongs to them. Bond belongs to those people. It doesn't belong to me. These people have grown up with it. They were holding out posters of the, Sean Connery movies and Roger Moore movies, and I was, I was there for about an hour and a half just signing things, and it was the first time I really got nervous about, and I was so grateful that it only happened right at the end, because I think that, if I'd felt some of that, I liken it a little bit. Directing a Bond movie is a little bit like being a lesser version of being the England football manager. You're going to disappoint some people. I don't know. You don't win. But it's. I remember in Skyfall going to Istanbul and to shoot the opening sequence, and I got out of the car at the hotel, and the bloke said to me, "Oh, we're so thrilled that you're shooting the Bond movie in Istanbul." And I said, "Oh, thank you very much." And he said, "I hope you're going to put some jokes in this one. You're going to put some jokes in this one." And I was like, "Well, let's see. Well, try and put a few laughs in, whatever." And I just sort of, shrugged it off. And I got to the counter. He was carrying my bags, and I got to the check-in, and the woman said, "Oh, I'm so pleased you're coming to Istanbul. So pleased you're shooting here. These movies are so much better now. They're not trying to be funny," she said. It's so much better, no jokes. And I thought, well, someone's going to be disappointed here. You just got to make the movie that you want to see, And so I did, and that was but that's when the director feels most exposed, is when you're actually right at the end and you have to launch it, and then you think, yikes, if they don't like it, it's my fault, you know. And it's such a hierarchy, movie directing, that to a large degree that is true. You know, if it's good, it's probably a lot to do with the director. If it's bad, it's a lot to do with the director. And there are those who are, you know, there are the Virat Kohli of the movie world would be somebody like Quentin Tarantino, for example, who lives every second of every movie. You know, he's completely, you know, he's full on set. He's talking the whole time. He's just like, you know, wildly over enthusiastic, you know, and just loving every second of it, and furious if it doesn't work out and all that sort of stuff. And then I would be, you know, a bit more the Eoin Morgan, perhaps. I'm not giving much away, you know.